The hills are so steep in downtown Seattle that some of the sidewalks have cleats. They used to be steeper. Less than 50 years ago, Seattle seemed to have reached the physical limit of its growth. It had climbed the hills as far as a town could go. The streets were so steep that members of the Seattle Symphony, who had to climb 3 blocks to reach their practice hall from the place where they stored their instruments, arrived winded, and sometimes rehearsals were over before all the horn players caught their breath. The musicians rigged a pulley to carry the instruments uphill so that strangers in town were sometimes startled to have a cello or a tuba swoop past them on the street. The rest of Seattle's residents couldn't solve their problems with pulleys, and they called in engineers to take the tops off the worst of the hills. By washing nearly as much dirt from the downtown hills as was moved during the digging of the Panama Canal, the engineers made it possible for a modern metropolis to be built on the half-drowned mountain that lies between Puget Sound and Lake Washington. Seattle has continued to spread out over the hills, and the hills are still steep. A 3-block walk through the business district may leave a visitor from flat country panting. If, after making the ascent from 2nd Avenue to 5th Avenue, he gasps some depreciation of hills in general and, say, Madison Street in particular, he is unlikely to receive sympathy from a resident. "Oh, they aren't bad," a Seattleite will say about his hills, or else, "Sure they're steep, but look at the view." Since most of the city clings to the sides of hills that rise from lake and bay and river, there is always a view. Lake Washington is to the east, at Seattle's back door. It makes a good backyard. It is a long and lovely lake, still marked with a wilderness, though highways encircle it and a floating bridge of concrete spans it. The racing shells of the University of Washington practice on it, and estates and mills and small homes and a naval air station stand on the shore. A mountain lake at sea level, a visitor called it 60 years ago, when most of the shore was still outside the city limits. It still feels like a mountain lake. The real mountains are 30 miles farther east. The Cascades run north and south across the state of Washington, and the wet winds from the Pacific drop their moisture as they sweep over the mile-high barrier, so that the western slope is dark with evergreens for half a year, and for the other half deep with snow. The Cascades shut Seattle off from the eastern part of the state, psychologically as well as physically. Seattleites don't think in the same terms as the people who live across the mountains, where the climate is dry and the trees shed their leaves and wealth is fruit and wheat. Seattle thinks in terms of lumber and deep water. Puget Sound is the town's front yard. The first settlers came there in canoes. The business district faces west by south. From the office buildings that have grown where the Douglas fir and western cedar stood as tall as skyscrapers, businessmen look westward across the water at another mountain range, the Olympics, wilder and wetter than the Cascades, the last wilderness, some call them, a timbered world to be conquered and cut.